All right, you are tuned into 1100 WSGI. This is Lee Marie with The Go Show, and I am so happy that you joined us today, and I am so happy to have the beautiful Pat Samler back in studio, and also the doc that you introduced all of Robertson County to.
Funny.
That's right, you did. The Wild Doc, also known as Dr. Dale Brown.
Yep.
From the Wild Roots Wellness Center.
Yes.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I'm so glad to have both of you today because this is always one of my favorite shows to do. And we've been getting a lot of great feedback, too.
Cool.
People just absolutely love to tune in to it. So happy that you're here. All right. So we'll start with our devotional. I think it's the 4th today, right? Anybody?
I think so.
Fourth?
Right?
I lost track. But
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Look at our phones quick.
All right, then
is.
here it is. March 4th. Refuse to worry. In this world, there will always be something enticing you to worry. That is the nature of a fallen, fractured planet. Things are not as they should be, so the temptation to be anxious is constantly with you, trying to worm its way into your mind. The best defense is continual communication with the Lord, richly seasoned with thanksgiving. Awareness of His presence fills your mind with light and peace, leaving no room for fear. This awareness lifts you up above your circumstances, enabling you to see problems from His perspective. So live close to Him. All right?
Yeah.
Amen.
That's
Amen.
a good.
It's a devotional the whole world needed over the last 2 years.
I know, huh? Right? And Wednesday we had on Pastor Joe Ray, and he was really talking about the importance of what we speak. So important.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of craziness out there, but as Christians, we know how the story ends. We know where we're going, and so we need to be that light for the rest of the world.
Well, I was almost talking to that idea here this week because there's more published papers coming out showing that the idea that the pandemic actually started supposedly November 17th. That was the first case in China. Now they're finding that in European countries, they're finding sewer samples, so sewer system samples that are saved, that it was early as 2019, March of 2019, they were finding SARS coronavirus 2 RNA within that sewer samples.
Wow.
And then they are doing human blood samples. They actually had a study, I believe it was out of Italy or France. And again, I've only kind of skimmed the surface of these papers, watched other major medical or PhD physicians that are talking about this information now and really kind of saying, okay, we need to trace where this pandemic started, where did it come from, where did it truly start? We've been pointing the finger at China, which for the longest time, I'm like, there was papers 6 months ago showing that United States blood samples and Red Cross were finding that December 13th, that they were finding antibodies in the blood samples of people who were giving blood to the Red Cross. So they had to have recovered from the illness already.
Oh.
And these antibodies
That was
take
in 2019.
at least 2 weeks.
2019?
Yeah. So in
Wow.
2019, you had blood samples of December 13th. People would have had to have recovered by several weeks. So then it means November, people in the United States, and it was like 6 or 9 states, I believe, as far as the number of samples. And again, they didn't sample every single state in the United States. So then our first cases in multiple states was in late November, which would actually mean mid-November. It was already circulating widely in the United States. So it's like you can't say it went from China and then multiple states in the United States within a matter of a few days.
Right.
So it was here before then. And then now they're saying in multiple countries around the world that as early as August, blood samples were showing. That study I was referencing, they were finding that in September 3rd, that there was blood samples that were being taken for people that were undergoing a long-term study. There was like 900 for cancer, or lung cancer. It was a lung cancer prevalence study. And out of 900 people, 100 and some had positive antibodies in September.
So
Wow.
10%.
Yeah. So, and then you got to take into account
Gee.
why. So it was there.
Mm-hmm.
It was circulating the globe in 2019, summer of 2019, it was circulating the globe. But it wasn't until the mainstream media propaganda, in my opinion, that promoted the fear
Right.
of the virus. And it was like, it wasn't until we became, the virus became known to the world that we should be living in fear, that it was deadly, that people were going to die from it and everything like that. And then people started dying from it in excess. Why did it take being told? And then, and that's the reality, is the human brain, if you test positive for a virus and you believe that's a horrible virus and it's just going to destroy you and it's going to harm you and it's a deadly virus, and you have that belief strongly in your brain, in your physiology is going to respond in that manner, and you're going to feel way worse. You're going to suffer way worse. You're going to struggle to fight that virus off way worse. Our minds have power. Our words have power. So this reality of when we didn't know the virus was circulating, it wasn't killing a bunch of people. All of a sudden, it was here in 2019. From March, it was in areas of the world.
When it was still a summer cold, it was
Yeah.
just a summer cold. But once it
And-
became,
But even 2019, it was here in the United States circulating widely in
That's what I'm
2019.
yeah, but in
Fall
our minds,
and winter even. But in our minds, it was just another cold or flu season.
right?
And it
Isn't
didn't
it
have
Acts that
nearly the
says-
fatality rate.
I think it's Acts that says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he."
Yeah. And so people bought into that idea. And I'm not saying that it's not a bad virus, that it doesn't cause illness, that it doesn't cause substantial symptoms, that it doesn't cause severe illness in those who are physically susceptible.
Right.
But there is even more evidence that people who, one of the strongest associated contributing factors to severe illness was anxiety surrounding the virus. If you had severe anxiety surrounding this virus, your risk when you contracted it
Wow.
of getting severe illness was far greater. It was like on par with diabetes and obesity, like that's the physical issues that put you susceptible to the virus. But then just the anxiety surrounding the fear of the virus puts you at equal almost risk of severe illness. So the power of the mind. And then it's like, okay, how do we help people? And it's not oh, see, you shouldn't have thought that way. It was what the world taught people. It's what the world told people. It's the fear propaganda of mainstream media is always fear, fear, fear.
Right.
Run for your lives.
Yes.
And
So
then-
it's like so perfect to what you were saying there and he was saying.
Great.
And again, I'm not saying, hey, just will yourself, think your way into it. But the power of your thoughts and the power of your words have a play and a part and impact. I always say, and I tell my patients, I'll be like, the things that I do, they're like, okay, if you were to get COVID or your family or when you did, we're pretty sure we did. We didn't care to test because it wasn't going to change what we were going to do to support
Right.
our bodies through that. I'm like, I get adjusted. I get my kids adjusted. We take herbs. These are God's medicines. We know how they support the body. And I'm like, even if I didn't have the ability to adjust or take the herbs, you know what? I'm not going to live in fear and sit there and think to myself, oh my God, we don't have elderberry. My kids are going to die from COVID. No, I'm going to say, you know what? It probably will take them an extra day to fight it off because of the way we eat, because of the way we take care of ourselves, because of our thought process. My kids are taught that when they have a fever, the fever is what God designed their body to utilize to fight off the virus more effectively, that their immune system is stronger, the hotter and warmer their body is. I mean, those are all scientific facts. So it's like, teach them that. And it's just like, let's cuddle on the couch and wrap up in the blanket and sweat it out. We're going to get through this. When I have to face that virus in the future, I'm not living in fear. It's just, okay, I'm going to weather that storm, no problem. We have that belief in our family, and that's what I try and give to people in my clinic, is that understanding of take better care of your body and go into things with a knowledge of how you've already supported your body, and then how do you support your body through a time period, an acute infection or whatever it may be.
So that brings up, the fever, because I hear so many people like, oh my gosh, they've got a fever, get the Tylenol. They act like a fever is like something you need to put out right away.
I've done some videos on fever, the false fear of fever, don't fear the fever, don't,
Sounds like a song.
don't fear the reaper, I was like, as a play on, the old,
No, I'm just kidding.
yeah. So I've done a lot of videos. I two major videos, I think, on my website I have there. And if you look at the scientific research on fever, you look at it in elderly with pneumonia, elderly with sepsis, those who are capable, and I'm wording this very specifically, those who were capable of mounting 105 fever had 0 deaths. The highest fever category. When they were getting above 103 to 105, there was 0 deaths. There is a case of a woman having 114-degree fever with 0 brain damage. You cannot tell me, and there is no evidence that the thermal temperature, the heat of your body causes any brain damage. There is, however, evidence that Tylenol reduces glutathione, which reduces your antioxidant capability, which then can cause kidney and liver damage and cellular oxidation, which can cause brain damage. So I can show you a path by which Tylenol could cause you to have brain damage, but there is no evidence that a thermal temperature during a fever, do you follow me? Now, heat stroke can cause neurological damage, but that's different. That's not your body generating the increase in temperature. That's you overheated your body because you were out in the sun working in not a well-ventilated area, whatever it may be. That's different.
Right.
But again, studies on the elderly, the higher the fever, the lower mortality. The lower the fever, the higher the mortality. Your body mounts a stronger, and there is plenty. I mean, you just look at immunology. Higher fever increases the efficiency of our immune cells. Our immune system works better.
Wow.
I mean, and then the animal studies even support it. I mean, there is no science that says a fever is detrimental. There really isn't. I mean, that's what, and it's crazy for people. I can say that, but people be like, what? The world has taught us fever is bad.
Yeah. Totally.
Fear of fever. I mean, but it that started from hundreds of years ago when fever illness, the only thing people knew is everybody was getting warm. And so they're like, it's the deadly fever. That's all they could observe. They didn't know that viruses floated in the air, we breathe them in, they caused illness, infection. You know what I mean? They didn't realize bacteria at times can hit a susceptible person. So all they saw around them was people getting warm, hot, and that's what they feared. They feared the fever. They didn't have any science, they didn't have any understanding. But, I mean, even in the 1800s, there were physicians who were using malaria to cure cancers. I mean, they would inject malaria. Now, malaria, it's like, okay, we inject that, we spike a fever, the fever helps boost the immune system, the person fights off the cancer, but then we cure the malaria,
Oh, wow.
So there's this like, okay, we're going to harness. I mean, I forget the physician. It's in the videos I've done on fever that one physician even said, you give me a fever and I'll cure anything.
Wow. So can you talk a little bit about what exactly is happening inside our body when we have a fever?
So when there's cells that are notified, when the body becomes infected with a virus or a bacteria and those types of pathogens, the body mounts a fever. There's release of cytokines that are chemical messengers that go to the brain, areas of the brain that control our thermal temperature, that regulate that. So then the brain says, oh, wait, okay, I'm getting a signal that I'm under attack from a virus or bacteria or pathogen, so it elevates the temperature. So you increase your cellular activity, you draw blood flow away from your hands and your legs and your extremities. My fingers are like radiators, they're giving off more heat because there's more surface area. So if I starve my arm of blood flow, bring it to the core, conserve that energy and that warmth. If I tell the brain, think about it this way. When you have a fever, you typically think you feel cold. You get the chills, but somebody else comes up, puts their hand on your forehead, and they're like, wow, you're burning up. But your brain says, no, I'm cold. You consciously think you're cold because then you seek warmth. You seek a heat source. You seek a blanket. you cover up. That's an additional way in which God designed our body and our brain to say, I need to warm up. I need to support what my body's doing.
So when we have a fever, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say so. Cool when like when you were young, my parents or my mom used to put me in like a cool bath or something to when you had a fever. So that's like the opposite.
Yeah, do not do that.
Okay. All right.
Do
So you
not,
want to, when you have a
because-
fever, get in bed and cover
Yeah.
up and be as warm as you can.
Because one of the things I always say is if you don't give a lizard a lamp, it's going to die of its fever. Or not of its fever, it's going to die of its infection. Lizards are cold-blooded. Animal studies have shown that lizards who do not have access to a lamp during a experimental infection where they infect these lizards with pathogens that are more deadly to the lizards not given a lamp, so they have no heat source, and they do not have the capability of elevating their temperature nearly as much as we do as warm-blooded animals or organisms or human beings do, or any like an animal with fur. So then you take the animals with fur. Okay, animals with fur. Let's do a study on ferrets where we shave them down to the skin versus ferrets that have their fur yet. Which one has a greater risk of dying during infection? The ones that you shave the fur off the ferrets. They've done these animal studies. Just by, you have no other effect except for they do not have insulation any longer. They cannot keep their body, and they can't go get a blanket. I mean, so that's like another, don't shave the hair off your ferret if it has a fever, because it's going to have a greater risk of dying, you know?
I'll remember that.
It's like give your ferret a blanket. So if you have ferrets out there, it's, so it's just those types of things. It's like, and again, we've got to change this. We've got to teach people about how the way the body functions, the way the body heals, the way the body goes through all the processes that keep us healthy. Sadly, in American medicine and westernized medicine, there's no teaching, there's no understanding. It's just, what are your symptoms? Here's a drug. And that has led to what we're looking at, which is, hundreds of thousands of people dying over the last year, people running in fear, nobody doing anything that could have supported themselves, the health departments, putting out, hey, if you test positive for COVID, go home, and if you get a headache and you get a fever, take Tylenol, which again is
Counterproductive.
counter to the science that has been available to us all for 30, 40, 50 years now, on that is detrimental. That led to people dying. That I have no problem in saying it. The advice from health departments led to more people dying because reducing a fever during an infection has been associated with a higher risk of dying from that infection. And it's just sad that it's like you couldn't even just give it's like, why couldn't you have just said, let's stay hydrated, but don't overhydrate, because there is actually evidence that. Because another thing, I tell people, listen to your body. If you're not hungry, don't eat. You don't have to force yourself to eat. You're not going to starve to death in 2-3 days, of fighting an infection off. If you're not thirsty, don't just guzzle water, because that can throw off your electrolytes, your kidney function, things like that. So if you overhydrate during an infection, that can cause a problem. Well, and the reality is people are like, well, what about kidney damage during a fever? That often comes from the medications that are kidney toxic. And then when you are slightly dehydrated and you add in a chemical into your bloodstream, it's more potent, toxic to your organs. So you have this dilemma that it's like, it's not the dehydration. And even then, it's like you really don't get into serious situations unless you are just, and you'll know, you can have situations, but the reality of the vast majority of the people, if you're not thirsty, don't drink a bunch of water at that moment
So
in
what's
time.
with the
Just
headache?
sit.
Is that because you're dehydrated, or that's what I would?
Not always. It could be. It's circumstantial to each individual, but a lot of times it's inflammation in the system. It's inflammatory cytokines being released from the immune responses going on within the body. So you have those situations where it's inflammation.
Right.
And there's you need inflammation to fight off viruses and bacteria. You need inflammation to destroy and remove infected cells. Your body has to say, okay, can I rescue this cell, or do I need to kill this cell so it doesn't replicate the virus and then spread more virus throughout my system? So then the immune system uses inflammation to kill your own cells to stop them from becoming and maintaining this factory of development of more virus.
Okay, so that's new information for me too, because when I'm sick, I try to drink as much water as I can, because that's what I always heard is like, you need to flush it out and the germs can't,
and that was what I used to say too. Within the last year, there was a paper that brought my attention to the scientific evidence that is out there that shows that they've had long studies and the accumulation of evidence, that not eating actually had a better result. Lower mortality rate.
Okay.
Those who basically starved the fever, starved the virus, those old wives' tales.
Yeah, there was like starve a cold and feed a fever.
I would starve both.
Starve both.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it
And
lets
it's
your
not
body
like, I'm like, listen to your body. Okay. And most of the time when people are fighting something off, they'll be like, I'm hungry. They get 3 bites in and they're like, yeah, I'm not hungry anymore. Your body is smart. God is smart. God wasn't stupid. God didn't say, "Oh shoot, yeah, they should be a lot more hungry when they got an infection." I messed up on that. I didn't pre-plan how their body should respond and the way their body should think and how they should feel during an infection. So if you're thirsty, drink a little bit, but don't chug. And I used to think, okay, just stay hydrated. And then I'm reading this paper and it's going through multiple, like, what is the science actually available to us? Oh, when they observed people, and these are observational studies, those who drank excessively had higher complication rates. Those who drank modestly or tended to not drink a lot of fluids during an infection had better survival, less complications. So, this was a paper on COVID and how it went through how much food you're eating, whether you were to treat a fever or let a fever run its course, and your hydration. So it went through those 3 factors, and they showed letting a fever is actually a strong, it was like a weapon against COVID. Like, this should be number 1, tell the world, don't fight a fever. Don't fight against the fever. Okay. And again, a woman at 114 degrees, fever, overcame her infection, serious infection, with 0 brain damage, complete normalcy of cognitive capability. That was mentioned in this COVID, paper, talking about, here's the evidence. Why are we telling people to fear fever? Why are we promoting this idea that you need to lower fever? The idea that 103, once it gets to 103, it shouldn't get too high. I hear people say that all the time. And I'm like, but what does the science say? The science says actually in elderly, if they get 105, they have the highest survival rate.
Wow.
It's like,
that is just mind-blowing,
Yeah.
But here's what's crazy is I had 2 nursing students, so 2 military members, husband and wife, going through nursing school, paid for by our government, everything like that. And the husband comes in first for chiropractic care. He's kind of like on the fence. He's like, I want to learn the natural stuff, so I'm coming into you for that and chiropractic care. And he's like, and we would get in discussions on things, whether it would be vaccinations or whether it be Tylenol and different things like that. He comes into me one day and he goes, so we're doing this mock-up of like what we would prescribe, what we would recommend for this patient coming into the hospital. And I never put Tylenol down. And it is standard, everyone gets Tylenol as soon as they come in the hospital. And he's like, I didn't do that because they didn't have a fever, they didn't have anything. So they didn't even have what medicine says is why you give a fever. If you have a fever, or why you give the drug, So he's like, they didn't even have any clinical. It was like a injury. And I didn't put it down. Gets his test or his written exam back from the teacher, and she docks him, and the teacher has a discussion with this nursing student that, well, you always give Tylenol upon admission to the hospital for anybody and everything.
Oh my gosh.
Because if you don't, if they acquire a fever while in the hospital, then it's a hospital acquired infection. So if you can suppress the fever, you reduce the rate of hospital acquired infection, but you don't reduce the infection rate. the actual being infected with a virus or bacteria that you
what
catch
shows
while
up.
being there. You reduce the symptoms, and it's necessary to see the symptoms and document the symptoms, which then document the case of acquired infection while in the hospital. So it's a liability. And he's like, she literally explained it to me as it's a liability to hospitals that if someone acquires an infection, so you work to suppress a fever even before a person has a fever so as to reduce the risk to the hospital on a liability standpoint.
Oh.
This is a nursing student. He's like, this is ridiculous. He's like, it's not for the patient's good. It's for the liability and protection. Because then
They don't know they got it.
if somebody comes in with a sprained ankle, Tylenol. Because if they get an infection while they're at the hospital, then they can blame the hospital, then they can sue the hospital, or the hospital is required to then take care of the medical expenses for the infection that was acquired at the hospital.
Wow.
This is a nursing student in our military, you know? I mean, this family, like, turned full circle from, like, going to... at the end of it, he's like, I don't even know what I'm going to do with this degree. I'm going to, like, he's like, I don't agree with mainstream, and it's becoming, and you're hearing more and more nurses, and slowly more and more medical physicians who are like, the way we run healthcare in America is wrong because it's so pharmaceutically based. It's not based on building health. It's based on treating symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, we need more of, people like you in that system to start to,
we do
influence them.
It's slowly, and I think even COVID was kind of a wake-up call to a lot of the world. A lot of people have kind of transitioned towards, wow, we really kind of was like run and hide. That was the mantra, and it's like, so that's all we got after hundreds of years of science and information. All we got is run and hide and wear a mask. And it's like,
well, it does seem that there's now more information coming out, on a lot of the natural, solutions to everything. And even just chiropractors, because I remember when I was little, I remember my mom saying, oh yeah, you don't go to them because they'll break your neck, know. And you hear all of that, and I know people in my life right now that are finally saying, all right, I'm going to go get an adjustment for the first time, so even just the stigma,
Well, I mean, the Wilkes versus AMA case, Dr. Wilkes was a chiropractor. And if you look up the Wilkes versus AMA, the American Medical Association was found guilty of conspiracy to destroy the chiropractic profession. They lied about what harms chiropractic could supposedly do. They lied. And they were found guilty in a Supreme Court case for doing that. Conspiracy to destroy the chiropractic profession. They had documents in that case which are called the Quack Pack. Medical physicians, upon entry into medical school, were given from the AMA a Quack Pack. The primary profession, it included herbalists, naturopaths, anybody promoting any type of herb or supplement or nutrition to heal and things like that. So acupuncture. It was anything other than the pharmaceutical industry.
Wow.
They falsified all these documents. And this was in libraries. You went to medical school, you got a Quack Pack. And this is the professions you do not associate with. And if you refer your patients to chiropractors, we'll take... there was warnings to them. You refer to these. They went after us. And it was a cool statement by the judge in that case. Actually said to the AMA, the representatives of the American Medical Association said, you've done the American people a great disservice. It wasn't you did the chiropractic profession a great disservice. It was because the evidence that chiropractic could have amazing benefits for people's health from things like angina. It's a spasm in your arteries. Sometimes it's not always a blockage of your arteries. Your nerves control your artery dilation and constriction. So you need a healthy nervous system for better vascular control of the blood vessel muscles. Okay? So cases like that. So it was like, hey, you did the American people a great disservice because chiropractic could help them with many health conditions, keep them off pharmaceutical drugs, do people a lot of good. But because of what you did and the lies you told, now people avoided generations avoided chiropractors because of lies. And what's sad is, like, most people never heard of the Wilkes versus AMA case,
Right.
but a lot of people know somebody who said, "Oh, don't go to a chiropractor because they could cause a stroke or break your neck or cause a bulging disc," and different things like that. You know, it's like, don't go to chiropractors that could harm you. A lot of people have heard somebody say that, which then someone told them that.
And that was AMA versus Wilkes.
Wilkes versus AMA.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down because I had never even heard of that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, you know, you don't hear about when we're now receiving I mean, did anybody hear recently that the Intercept is a news media outlet that has an article, they had to file a lawsuit against the NIH and NIAID. So that's NIAID's kind of the infectious disease and allergy, government organization that Fossey's the head of, okay? And that helped to fund research into coronaviruses, bat coronaviruses and SARS coronaviruses, and infecting human tissues, and doing the science that promoted the ability of humanized mice to be more virulently infected with bat coronaviruses. So they did the research to create this, okay? Well, they had to file a lawsuit against, and I did a video on Locals. It's another more of a freedom of speech, like Facebook's not a freedom of speech. Instagram, you don't have freedom of speech. So did a video on it. They had to file a lawsuit against the NIH to acquire the documents, and out of 314 pages that the lawsuit allowed them to get, 292 of the 314 pages are completely redacted, meaning they are blacked out, and that's our NIH. It's like and it's funny because it's like, you go through the 314 pages, and all of a sudden you see a page that actually has some text that you can read, and it's strategic plan to research COVID-19. So it's like the NIH has a PDF of their plan to research COVID-19, but we're not allowed to know their plan to research COVID-19. Why can't we know your plan? Like, shouldn't it have been like, okay, figure out where it came from?
Right.
Figure out if it came from nature or was it made in a lab? Like, why can't we know if your plan to figure things out was to we're not, it's just like mind-boggling. Like, we're not even, you had to redact everything but the title of that document. Why?
Wow.
It's our taxpayer dollars, supposedly.
Yeah, if we're
They
paying for it,
redacted
we wanna know.
90% of the documents.
Wow.
It's funny, though, because if you read the latest, the lawsuit that got 314 pages, the very first page and the very, very first text that you can read is, there's a Lillian that works for the NIH who emails Eric, who works for the NIH, and it says, "When this is all over, I owe you a beer," or something. That's the email from Lillian at the NIH to Eric at the NIH. Is, we're allowed to know that Lillian will owe Eric a beer at the end of all this. It's just like, you didn't redact that our NIH is like joking around, during a pandemic of like, I owe you a beer when we get through this. When it's all over, I'm buying you. I mean, people say that when they're doing, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
when there's something they're stressed over. You know what I mean? I'm really stressed over this. We've got to be very careful on what we release to the public. And and there's stuff like that says, this is not for public. It will say specifically, this is not for public release.
By us then, neither.
I know, it's not for public release. This is what we want you to tell the media. This is not for public release. And then it's blacked out. And you're like, so we get to know that there's something you don't want us to know.
Right.
But we're not allowed to know what you didn't want us to know.
Seems to be more and more the case.
Yeah. Anyways, we're off on a tangent.
No problem. All right. Well, I can't believe that it's already 8:36, but it is. So I'm going to take a little break here to talk about some of the upcoming events. We are in the first week of the month, which of course is a great time to make your new plans and new goals. But let's see, this coming Saturday, the GOP is having their Patriot Potluck over at Purpose Life Church at 805 Memorial Boulevard. Boulevard. And the guest speaker is going to be Paul Engel of the Constitution Study. He's an author, speaker, podcaster, and radio host. And so that will be great. 8:30 a.m. over at Purpose Life Church. And let's see, the next day, Sunday, March 6th, the sock hop over at Murph's Country Music Barn. And this is all ages. It starts at 2 p.m. There will be a dance lesson. You don't need any experience, and you don't need a dance partner. And it's going to be $10 for adults, $5 for kids, free raffle, lots of fun. Murph's Country Music Barn is located at 3336 Winters Road in Cedar Hill. So come on out, spend some time with your family. You know, I think people spend too much time with their electronics, and they need to get out and play. So that's a great family event. And then, of course, on Monday, we heard from Pastor Joe Ray, and they are having some free workshops, and they have 2 left. And so this coming Monday at 7 p.m. at the AIM Church in White House, and that is at 3301 Highway 31 West in White House. And this one coming up is going to be on community and occupation. So they did an overview of planning, and it was an amazing workshop. I got to go to that. But now on Mondays, they're breaking them down, and so they got 2 left. So this coming Monday is on community and occupation. So if you're just looking for some direction in your life, you know, we are told to turn to the Lord, you know, and this is a great way because you saw him on Wednesday, didn't you?
So good.
He's just
So good.
oozes scripture nonstop, and I love that. You
I
know,
and he knows the address of every scripture. I love when people can do that. I wish I could do that.
Exactly. Yeah, I was amazed because when I went to that
Right.
workshop, and you know, I'm thinking, oh, it's a workshop on planning, you know, with a pastor, and I'm like, that's just different, you know.
Yeah.
But boy, he had a scripture for everything.
And that's cool.
Yeah, it was really, really good. So I highly recommend, if you're not doing anything this Monday at 7 p.m., that you get on out to the AIM Church in White House. And their website is theaimchurch.com. And actually go to that website because they had some great resources. I don't know, did you get to look that up?
No, I haven't yet, but I want to just because it was such a good interview, you know?
Yeah. He had these, you know, affirmations, biblical affirmations to speak over your life every morning. And he has all those PDFs on there under resources. So if you go there, you know, he's got just great charts, and he's very organized.
Yeah.
Hopefully some of that will rub off on me at some point. So anyways, that is Monday. And then, of course, let's see, the following Sunday, just mark your calendar because the Kingsman Quartet is coming to town, and they're going to be right here at the Oakland Baptist Church. And that is Sunday, March 13th at 6 p.m. in the city of Springfield. And, of course, the day after that, March 14th, is the second Monday of the month. What happens on the second Monday of the month, Miss Pat?
Second Monday of the month?
Uh-oh. Do, do, do,
Oh, no.
do, do, do.
Second Monday of the... TFA.
That's right. Second Amendment meets on the second Monday. Oh, you're a good thing you remembered
Tennessee
that.
Firearms Association.
That's right.
Greenbrier.
And you know who we're gonna have? We're gonna have the executive director, John Harris, is gonna be there.
I love listening
Yes,
to him.
yes,
He's so
yes.
good.
So this is going to be a great one to come to because they're having a lobby day coming up at the Capitol in Tennessee, and so he's going to be really telling us about that and how to do that and how important it is to get out there and show in force.
Yes.
So, do you know anybody that went out to that truck convoy yesterday?
No, but I wish I could have. I
Right.
couldn't. I had other
Yeah, that
things.
was cool that it was coming through Tennessee.
Did it?
So, I was busy, but I'm sure I'll run into somebody that
so
went.
inspiring.
Yeah.
It's crazy how like the truck convoy and everything that was going on in Canada, it was all over the news, and then as soon as Ukrainian war started, and now Russian, it's like nothing, no clue. But yet it's like we're
And then
basically
that's
seeing
what-
the firsthand of a
across
tyrant,
America.
of a tyrant in Canada, basically taking and locking up bank accounts and everything like that. It's scary what
Yeah.
control they have when people are basically like, hey, we want freedom back. And you look at any state like Florida or Texas or different places that opened up early, that went against the mandates and gave people their freedom to choose. They didn't have excessive mortality. They had some of the lowest mortality rates.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those who walked in freedom without fear, and didn't live in fear under tyrants. And
Yep.
it's just. Yeah.
All right. So we are back on our topics now. Let's see, 8:42. Okay, good. We got about 15 minutes left. Do you want to do the closing prayer, Miss Pat, at the end?
Sure.
Okay. Not yet. We still have about 15 minutes. So I love the discussion that we are having so far about fever and Tylenol and everything, because that I know for
It's
some
a pivotal,
people.
just a change in mindset and understanding of how the body functions, the way that God designed our body to respond to infectious disease, is just a tip of the iceberg of the need for massive change in the way in which we think about health care, how we take care of ourselves, how we respond, how we think.
Okay, follow
What's up?
that. I just I have a question, because people have asked me this and I don't have a clue, But as far as healthcare, what is the difference between like a naturopathy, holistic, functional,
Like, what is the difference between
all those things? Yeah,
individuals?
That's a good question.
yeah.
There's not really I wouldn't say there's a definition that differentiates exactly, because a lot of those are terms that are it's not like there are naturopathic schools, there are naturopathic certification programs, there are functional medicine certification programs, there are holistic medicine,
Exactly.
teachers out there and stuff. So there's not a huge governing body over that. Like, I have a chiropractic board of chiropractic examiners that I have to have, go through and pass my chiropractic medical boards. Basically, you have to be able to understand physiology, anatomy, things like that. You have to pass these tests, versus like functional medicine. To get your certificate, you need to pass those, but there's not a large, huge governing body over it. There are organizations that have sprung up and developed a criteria and a testing and things like that, but it's not a huge, state by state. It's different on what terms you can use. Like, some states you're not allowed to even put that you're a naturopath. There's states that have, you can go through these classes and schools are okay for nutritionists, but no one else, even if you trained under any sort of certification program or knowledge-based program, that you can't say anything near nutritionist, that you are certified in any sort of so it's I don't know, there's just it's terms that people utilize, which are okay. It's a descriptive terminology, but there's no definitive difference always.
So naturopath doctor versus the functional doctor, there isn't like certain specialties that each.
No, there's not you could be one and you could be all of those. And depending on how you want to utilize the terms, and if you want to label yourself that term, most functional medicine, people can practice functional medicine type of thing, but you are not a functional medicine doctor, because there is no doctorate of functional medicine. There are certification programs that give you a certificate in functional medicine. And like, usually if you consider functional medicine, there are chiropractors that are certified in functional medicine. There are medical physicians who are certified in functional medicine. There are nurse practitioners who are certified in functional medicine. There are even nutritionists and naturopaths who have gone through the functional medicine certification programs, that are out there, and there are multiple out there.
How many hours of time is that?
It depends on sometimes 1,000, sometimes 300. That's another thing, is there's not a definitive, like, you have to have this number to achieve that certification.
Okay.
So there's not a huge
like in
regulatory.
Real estate, I have to have so many hours to be able to keep my license.
Yeah.
So.
Like, I went through and I've done, I could have gotten a herbalist certification, but I went online, acquired that, and I have to do my CEs every year, which are only 24, and I go through, and I'm going through, and I can go through and sit in front of what is considered a functional neurology board, which there is organizations who, have formed organizations, individuals who are a combination of neurologists and chiropractors different specialty groups, medical physicians who have formed and then basically created, okay, we're going to certify people in functional neurology. I'm not a I would not be, once I've completed that and sat in front of the board and gone through the testing, I wouldn't be a functional neurologist, but I can be a chiropractor practicing and certified in functional neurology.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, like, I didn't do the tests on herbalism and stuff. I just wanted the information. I wanted, okay, when I first started studying herbalism, I'm very much like, my personality is, I don't like the big pieces of paper hanging on the wall. I'm like, it's like prideful in that's my personality. I'm not saying people are prideful if they hang those there. I probably should hang. My wife thinks I should go through and hang more things like that in the office to say, hey, see, you went through and you studied this stuff and you poured your heart and soul into understanding herbalism and things like that. You should get certified in those things. And I'm like, but the information's kind of free out there. I mean, I can get on PubMed and acquire, research papers, and I can acquire all the textbooks I want to acquire, and not pay somebody else for a piece of paper. And that's just me, though. So, so there's not, and like naturopaths are more typically along the lines of, utilizing only, like a functional medicine, if they're an MD as well, they kind of are on that borderline. They use pharmaceutical drugs at times. They use hormone replacement at times. They work and dabble, I consider kind of more of a dabbling into more isolated nutrient supplementation instead of pharmaceuticals first. So they're that direction. Then I would say if somebody is considered themselves an herbalist or naturopath, they're more along the lines of typically using whole plant-based food, nutrition, things like that. Okay. The natural things. You're not going to find in nature, you're not going to find a B complex only. God never created anything that just has B vitamins in it. I cannot find a plant source. I cannot find an animal source. I cannot find anything in nature that I can pick up, that I can dig up, that I can pluck off a tree and consume, and all I get is B vitamins. And a lot of times functional medicine uses more of those isolated, compounded, supplements that are isolated, higher potency, and there's a time and place, I believe, for me. I'm like, I lean away from that. Like, a multivitamin to me is eating deer liver. Deer liver is, if you look at the NIH, National Institute of Health, and their list of things that have the highest concentration of B12 in them and B vitamins, beef liver, grass-fed beef liver is there. No, deer liver's not on there, but I'm pretty sure, and usually wild animals have even a broader spectrum and higher concentrations of nutrients and minerals and things like that because of their very wide-ranging diet. They don't just eat grass that's grown in the confines of the field that they get to live. They go out and they eat woody shrubs, they eat brushy things, they eat all the different broadleaf grasses, all the things, and they get way more nutrition from that than just a grass, So that's my kind of multivitamin because that's the natural source.
And I enjoyed you.
It's
You had
the
an
highest
article
B12
on Facebook about
we
beef
put a
liver.
little post out. It's actually a buddy of mine. He sourced it, and so price-wise and things like that for grass-fed New Zealand. And New Zealand it's kind of like the source for, if you were to get all the different if you look up supplements for beef liver, everybody sources from New Zealand, basically. All of the same sources. New Zealand is basically like the one and only, practically, it seems, source for grass-fed beef liver supplementation. Everybody sources from there, and then they just put their own label on it and things like that. Now, what's unique about my buddy's, grass-fed beef liver, and he kind of invested in that, is that there's no flow agents in it. And so, they'll put like on the machinery and, when they're putting the beef liver dried powder in the capsules, they'll put like a magnesium stearator powder on the machines to allow it to slide and not stick to the metal, through static electricity. It's not like it's got liquids or anything, or it's just, there's no flow agent. So then it loses some in the manufacturing. So it's you would consider it slightly higher quality. You're getting the same New Zealand grass-fed beef liver, but you're getting a flow agent, maybe a residual amounts of the flow agents that they use. And usually there's calcium carbonate, magnesium stearate, different things like that aren't necessarily harmful to a large degree. And then there's no binders in there. There's nothing that's used to kind of compact it together. It's just gelatin capsule with dried beef liver inside of it.
All right, so we only have about 7 or 8 minutes left, and we haven't talked anything about your wellness center. So I do want people to know what you what you provide over there, because I know that one of the newer things you're doing now is oxygen therapy, right?
So we've invested in hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Yes, so we are going to be doing HBOT is kind of the acronym for it. HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So when you look at it, if you were to go to like PubMed, okay, and type in, probably one of the biggest ones in the up and coming science right now is things for TBI, concussion syndrome, use for regeneration and improvements post-stroke, people who kind of plateau, they're not going to get any better, and then they go through HBOT and they go through hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and they can actually regain neurological function. So there's evidence that is accumulating. Now, FDA approval, what I will say is I would not be treating strokes. I would not be treating TBIs. I would not be treating individuals with cognitive health problems, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. There's research and evidence of its benefit for those individuals. And a lot of people in the autistic community utilize HBOT to improve the neurological development and health of their children who are suffering with autism. That's one of the reasons I felt the need to invest in that, to try and help people expand their capability and improve their cognitive health, and their neurological health. And with Clarksville, Tennessee being home in the 101st in this major military installation, luckily I believe Kentucky is going to start approving and paying for our military members to get it for reasons that go beyond what currently the FDA has approved HBOT therapy for. FDA approval for therapies are things like diabetic ulcers, diabetic wounds that are having difficulty healing. That's kind of what they use it for. Certain infectious diseases. You have acute carbon monoxide poisoning. You can rush somebody to a hospital that has high pressure, pure oxygen in acute situations. I wouldn't say, if there was nowhere that they could get it, and I would be willing to try and help save somebody's life from carbon monoxide poisoning, but I would suggest going to higher compression, pure oxygen hospitals. I believe Springfield has an HBOT system, but they can only use it for the things like the diabetic wounds, for the very minimal number of FDA approved reasons, and they're more like critical. It's not like regenerative healthcare. It's sad that we don't have a lot of insurances and things like that and FDA approval for things that are regenerative and maximizing of somebody's health potential. We have it for, like, again, carbon monoxide poisoning, where if you're going to die from carbon monoxide poisoning, if you can get in an HBOT system and increase the oxygen into their blood, you can save their life and reduce the detrimental damaging effects of carbon monoxide poisoning. Or like with scuba divers is usually what people have heard of hyperbarics for, is people who have the bends, they come up too fast, they get an air embolism, and then you want to compress that air again and stop it from being a bubble inside their blood vessel that stops the blood flow and causes tissue damage. So they use it for that in scuba diving situations and emergencies after scuba diving.
So HBOT can really be used on most anything with nerve damage.
They're seeing it increase telomere length, so it's just got a lot of wide-ranging health benefits. And so I like to offer it to the public for people who wish to seek that therapy for improving their overall health. I can't, and it will come down to a lot of people with neurological injuries, strokes, concussions, things like that. I don't treat those conditions because it's not FDA approved, but I can make that therapy accessible to people with those conditions if they desire to seek improvements beyond. But just PubMed it. TBI, traumatic brain injury, concussions, and HBOT, HBOT, or hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and just the plethora in the science. And if you look like on what's cool on PubMed is they have like this bar graph of like the science that's accumulating on hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and it's just like skyrocketing in 2010 today. It just has gone up exponentially, and so they're finding more safety information. There's a lot of people seeking out HBOT therapy for post-COVID related lung injury, overall long COVID type situations. Again, there's nothing approved for long COVID. It's a condition that's affecting a lot of people, and there's not a lot of science on therapies that are effective. So really, it's clinically doctors saying, okay, what makes sense for me to try and help this person? I've found herbs like mullein to help with inflammation, prolonged inflammation of the lungs post-COVID. I don't treat long COVID. I don't treat post-COVID. I treat a human being who comes into me and they happen to have not fully recovered from COVID. And then I say, okay, what symptoms is the body suffering with? What makes logical sense from an herbalist or herbology or phytotherapy standpoint or chiropractic standpoint? How can I help this person's body heal better, recover?
So like people who have long haul or had COVID, a lot of times, I've heard anyway, people complaining about neurological.
A lot of neurological symptoms seem to be post-COVID.
Like even memory loss and concentration and all that. So this could very well maybe help that.
One of the herbs that I've found for that has been ginkgo. It increases blood flow and circulation. It's very much a vascular herb that is amazing and has science behind it on other neurological conditions, dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that it has beneficial effects for those, neurological deteriorative diseases. So then it makes sense, though there is no published research on ginkgo and post-COVID brain problems.
All right. So we have 1 minute left.
That's cool. All right. Sorry.
But give your phone number a couple times.
Wild Roots Wellness Centers. So if you look us up online, and then the Wild Doc is kind of my alias online, my online persona, and then the phone number is 931-591-2010.
Again?
931-591-2010.
And you're located up on Wilma Rudolph in Clarksville.
Just down from the co-op.
And what days are you open there?
So Monday through Thursday is my clinic.
Okay, Monday through Thursday.
Days, yes.
All right, so give him a call or look him up online. He's also on Facebook and Instagram.
Yep.
So
while they don't censor me, got one page deleted.
Lots of
you're speaking to your truth when Facebook deletes you.
Oh yeah, that's true, huh? Okay, well, lots of great information. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Man, I got to watch the show again and take notes. All right, Miss Pat, you ready for the prayer?
Sure.
Okay.
Father, we just thank you for this opportunity once again, just to come together, Lord, and just to gain this wealth of knowledge from Dr. Dale. And Lord, we just pray right now for every listener, Lord, that needs your touch for healing, Lord God, that Father, you provide so many avenues, and this being one that has been really, really, really beneficial for me. I thank you for that, and I ask, Lord, that you would lead and guide each and every listener to the source of freedom and health, Lord, that you have for them, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Ms. Pat, for also joining us. We always love to have you here on the Go Show.
Got to be here with my doc.
Yeah, when he first got here, he's like, "Is Pat coming?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not quite sure." And he was like, "Oh."
I tried to call you, but I didn't. It was too late. You're probably already here.
No worries. All right. You've been tuned into 1100 WSGI with the Go Show. We will see you on Wednesday. Have a great week and God bless. And a great weekend. See you all this weekend. There's lots of stuff going on.